Dive into America's coastal waters and discover a fascinating world rich with life and history. A realm of vibrant diversity, from the odd and reclusive to some of the largest creatures on Earth. Join Jean-Michel and the Cousteau team as they explore America's underwater treasures and the national marine sanctuaries created to better understand and protect them. It's Jean-Michel Cousteau, Ocean Adventures.
Jean-Michel Cousteau and his team have explored 6 of the 13 national marine sanctuaries on their mission to reveal and define America's underwater treasures. Sharing the challenge of this enormous task are Jean-Michel's son, Fabien, and daughter, Celine. They now turn to one of America's underwater cultural treasures and the first national marine sanctuary, a Civil War battleship lost off the coast of North Carolina, the USS Monitor. Over 240 feet below the surface, it will be a technical and potentially dangerous dive. 1862, the USS Monitor was the Union Army's answer to the Confederate ironclad ship, the Virginia. It had the world's first successful revolving turret, allowing the crew to aim and fire the guns rapidly in any direction, and was the first ship to house crew entirely below the waterline. On New Year's Eve, 1862, after less than a year of service, the Monitor sank in a severe storm. 16 crewmen died.
For the archaeological community, the primary goal that you have when you have a site like this is to preserve it in place. We found out that we were really losing the wreck quickly, and if we didn't try to save some of the most important pieces of the Monitor, particularly the turret, that the whole thing was going to collapse.
If their dive is successful, Matt, Blair, and director of photography Chuck Davis will join the select few to lay eyes on this historic site.
What are we going to do? Where do we put them?
What we want to do is be able to make sure when you hit the wreck site that you're familiar with which way to go when you know, so you're not wasting time on the bottom. This is the north side, or the high side of the wreck as we call it. Like I say, the turret's gone. In fact, here's a current side scan of the wreck site itself. Now this is current as of last May. There's the original location of the turret hole. This is a section of the armor belt that was swung out.
Which is here now.
Right.
Yes.
So that'd be out about here.
Let's talk about currents.
The current is normally
This
cutting
way.
across just about at that angle. Now, having said that, though, we have had current meters out here that show that the current goes all the way around the compass.
Okay.
This is their deepest national marine sanctuary dive, requiring weeks of training to master the technology that allows them to stay deeper longer at 8 atmospheres of pressure.
Understand, you are looking for the wreck.
They breathe a mixture of helium and oxygen, less narcotic at depth than nitrogen. But they must descend slowly to prevent dangerous oxygen buildup in the rebreathers.
We see the wreck. Okay.
The Monitor's shape becomes apparent, claimed completely by the sea. It first served in war. Now it serves the ocean as a platform for life. This deep dive is one back in time to a very real piece of history. team locates a hole where the anchor chain was stored, then swims along the monitor's armored belt that forms the famous outline of the ironclad shipwreck. The sanctuary staff have asked the team to collect samples of wood and iron, part of ongoing studies to provide a better understanding of the saltwater deterioration of the components that were used to construct the monitor and to aid in its restoration. The sample will reach the surface long before the divers, who will spend over 2 hours on the anchor line decompressing. For Matt and Blair, history has become personal. To preserve the turret, each of the 8 1-inch thick layers must be removed from the outer hull and treated, a process that may take 10 years. It will then go on display at the Mariners Museum in Newport News, Virginia, where it will join the collection of other artifacts recovered from the monitor.
One of the things we always attempt to do with our national marine sanctuaries is provide the maximum amount of public access to and enjoyment of the resource. Here we have a wreck that can only be accessed by a handful of technical divers or somebody with a submarine. So in a way, saving all this material from the bottom when we did it was because we felt like we had to prevent losing it entirely. We literally will be able to let millions of people enjoy this.
There are possibly 100,000 shipwrecks in North American waters, each of them a piece of history, each with its own human story. A surprisingly treacherous passage along America's shore lies not at the sea, but in the Great Lakes at Thunder Bay. Known as Shipwreck Alley, the fresh waters of Lake Huron have preserved the most significant collection of shipwrecks in the world, spanning over 2 centuries and making it buried treasure for historians.
How these ships were built, what kind of wood they used, where were they going, where were they coming from. To me, that's part of history. And if I understand my own backyard, then I'll do a better job understanding the rest of the planet.
How many ships are laying at the bottom?
Well, in the whole of the Great Lakes, as many as 10,000. Within the 448 square miles that make up the sanctuary, there are probably 160 and another 50 or 80 or...
But shipwreck research in the Great Lakes is being threatened by an unexpected invader capable of changing history.
It's all clear. You can see everything.
It
And
is.
this was, what, 3 years ago?
This video was taken in 2002. This is 1848, captured in this moment in time on the bottom of Lake Huron, which is really what's magical about the Great Lakes.
This is just amazing. It looks almost like someone put this wreck down yesterday.
But that was 2002. By 2005, everything had changed. 2 species of mussels, quagga and zebra, had invaded the Great Lakes, causing untold damage, not only to the shipwrecks, but to the entire Great Lakes region.
What alerted everybody to the problem to begin with was early on, zebra mussels were colonizing the insides of water intake structures, power plant intake structures, any raw water users of the Great Lakes. They had pipes out into, drawing water in. Zebra mussels were infesting the inside and actually closing these pipes and decreasing the capacity of these pipes to draw water through it.
Zebra mussels come from the Caspian Sea.
Caspian Sea, Black Sea region, right?
And the quagga mussels, where do they come from?
Black Sea. So we suspect that a ship brought them in the ballast water. Yep.
And of course, we dump our ballasts wherever we want and create chaos.
Yeah.
But this is growth of only 3 years.
Yeah.
I'm wondering in another 3 years or 10 years or...
This whole phenomenon sure lends some urgency to documenting these wrecks, though, doesn't it?
Currently, there is no clear solution to the mussel invasion or to the ultimate environmental effects in Thunder Bay. Off the New England coast, however, rather than wanting to get rid of a species, there are major efforts trying to keep just one species, the lobster, alive and flourishing. The Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary's abundant resources include numerous whale species here to feed, and making it a popular whale-watching destination. Historically, groundfish, like cod, have made these waters a mecca for fishing for over 400 years. But by the mid-1990s, cod were completely overfished and driven into commercial extinction. Without the cod, the lobster flourished.
When there are a lot of these big codfish around, well, then they'll eat the lobsters. If you remove those codfish through fishing, then you create a refuge from predation that's size related. In other words, once a lobster grows above the size at which the average codfish around here can eat, there's virtually nothing else that will feed on it. And these days, there's more lobsters than probably ever before.
So a community long dependent on fishing is now dependent primarily on lobster. But lobsters, too, could be easily overfished. A key factor in careful management is to understand their breeding cycle. Stellwagen's rich waters provide an important location for research.
I work primarily in the coastal waters of Maine, and there the lobsters are mostly juveniles. And I'm hoping that out here on the bank, I can find some breeding areas where there are larger lobsters, the reproductively active lobsters.
Why are you doing this? I mean, what are we learning?
Well, what we know about how lobsters get together and make more lobsters is based on observations made in large aquaria. And what we know is based on laboratory observations. In the field, no one's ever recorded this lobster behavior.
Wow, look at this.
I'd say that's probably 25, 30-year-old lobster.
Wow.
So, all we have to do is find some females that are ready to mate, attach a tag, so we can go back and follow them to the big male. It transmits a signal that we can listen to underwater using a hydrophone, which is an underwater microphone. Each individual lobster has a separate frequency and code. And underwater, you listen to track the lobster who's wearing this. It's important to know what habitats lobsters use for courtship and mating behavior, because without reproducing, there is no future for the lobster.
In the last 10 years, the deployment of lobster gear within the sanctuary has increased greatly. And one of the concerns is that as fishing pressure increases within an area, the size and age structure of the population is going to change. Having big, old animals is extremely important to maintaining a functioning biological community.
Righty. We do have some very large females. This has been a proven producer of eggs, the future of our generations, right? This is what we want to do. We have to release this. We do have a much larger.
Whoa.
With,
are they egging out yet?
They're egged.
Oh, nice. Now those are close to hatching.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, you can see the little eyes in each egg. There are 2 eyes. And as the female gets larger, this gets wider and she carries more eggs. Not only does a larger female carry more eggs, she carries larger eggs, and her offspring are larger when they hatch. So these animals are particularly important to the fishery, the future of the fishery.
With people like Diane sharing her expertise with other scientists, with the fishermen, has worked to everybody's advantage.
The lobster is an icon of New England seafood, but it's also wildlife. And the National Marine Sanctuary is beginning to look at, well, how do these organisms function in this larger biological context? And are there things that we can do that can help restore the balance in this place, in this national treasure?
Even a fish as unlikely as the American goosefish, whose enormous mouth will hold half of its own body weight, plays a role as predator or prey in the carnival of creatures that crisscross the sea alive with diversity. Stellwagen Bank offers a cautionary tale, not only of what taking too much can do, but of the irreplaceable value of even the most unlikely species. In the cold waters of Monterey, California, similar lessons. The Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary is the deepest of all the sanctuaries, with a grand canyon of rich, upwelling waters that nourish an explosion of life.
We've got 33 species of mammals, we've got unusual birds, we've got 340 species of fish. This is a very unique and unusual area.
But this incredible ecosystem lives day to day in a delicate balance with industry, agriculture, fisheries, and recreation. A balance that we have only recently begun to understand. Unfortunately, the learning curve came with a high price. Our actions over the last 150 years have pushed the vibrant diversity of Monterey Bay to the edge. In the first half of the 20th century, Monterey Bay was one of the most productive fisheries in the world, blessed with an abundance of fish year after year. Communities sprang up overnight, fortunes were made, businesses were booming.
When I was a boy growing up in Monterey, this was the sardine capital of the world.
After a 50-year bonanza riding a silver tide of seemingly inexhaustible sardines, finally the last ones were canned, and Monterey crashed.
A lot of people in Monterey were the victims of what happened because there were a lot of jobs on Cannery Row, there were a lot of jobs associated with the fishing industry, there were a lot of families that were very dependent on that economically, and suddenly it was wiped out, it was gone.
With fishing dramatically reduced, life underwater began to return to the bay, without the sardines. Around the same time, one site was made off limits to fishing, and the team stops at one of Monterey Bay's totally protected areas.
Point Lobos is a 500-acre reserve, and it is precipitous, and it is prolific with life, and because it has been a reserve for over 40 years, it is as it should be, and as it was many years ago.
If a healthy marine ecosystem could be compared to an art museum, Point Lobos would be among the world's greatest. A Louvre, a Uffizi, a National Gallery. The color and texture of the exhibits would change constantly, depending only on the good luck of the observer. And the price of admission, protected areas.
Was it precipitous
It
and
was
prolific?
precipitous and prolific.
To see the contrast that can exist between complete protection and unlimited use, even within a sanctuary, the team dives next at Maccabee Reef. Gone are the colorful sea stars, the huge schools of fish, and the wide variety of sea life. Instead, the team found remnants of old Cannery Row equipment and an eerie emptiness. Although the complex diversity is diminished here, the area is far from lifeless.
How do we make the commercial fishing and the recreational fishing understand that we are on their side, that by protecting these waters, it will act like nurseries and repopulate?
I think what fishermen need to understand, and I say this as someone whose grandfather was a fisherman, that if we don't renew that resource, if we don't take care of that resource, then there will not be future generations of fishermen. If we exercise good stewardship, then it'll be there for future generations. I mean, they will benefit more than anyone.
Wise management with any animal will in turn benefit other species as well.
This California sea lion population is doing very well. They're increasing at the rate of 4, even 5 to 6% a year. And my curiosity with these guys is what are they doing right as compared to the other sea lion species that are either very small populations or populations that are in decline. And ultimately, my interest is to work with fisheries biologists and try to put that information together with the fisheries management folks when they're modeling how much fish we can take from the oceans. So what we've got is it's a floating platform with a 12 by 10 enclosure. And the idea is that the animals would just passively jump inside. We take one animal at a time, bring them into that squeeze cage, and the squeeze cage works such that the side walls are interlocking. So that we can bring the side walls down like that and push the animal toward the bottom of that squeeze cage and essentially physically restrain them. Putting one of a CTD tag, which as the animal dives, it collects information on the dive depth, dive duration, temperature of the water, and then actually gets a conductivity, which we can then use to calculate salinity. They've got a beautiful new coat of fur now, so we actually just use 5-minute epoxy and glue it to their fur, and it just, as long as you glue it on there well, we're hoping those tags will stay attached for anywhere from minimum 3 months as hopefully as much as 6 or 7 months.
The tagging of Pacific pelagics, or TOPS project, monitors how wide ocean processes affect many species, including sea lions. But tagging is only the beginning. The real results are at the computer.
Just go to the internet and go to topcensus.org. We get to this front page here, and you can see all the different species within TOP that are being tagged. So what we can do is look at this information on a day-to-day basis. And after a season of data, we can sit back and start to look at the larger picture as far as how animals use the ocean on a year-to-year basis. If we want to look at all the different species combined of sharks, tuna, albatross, seals, and sea lions, you can see that it's almost entirely covering the North Pacific. And what we find, doing a little bit of analysis, is actually where they're spending most of their times are these hot areas, these red areas.
And that's right where we are.
Yeah, we're right here in the Monterey Bay, and this is the Monterey Bay National.
Offshore from San Francisco, the Gulf of the Farallones National Marine Sanctuary is one place where elephant seals, once considered extinct, began their unexpected recovery. Southeast Farallon Island is a national wildlife refuge managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and where elephant seals formed a breeding colony in 1972 and grew rapidly.
If I told you everything going on the beach behind me, it would be like a soap opera. There's cows losing their pups. There's other cows adopting their pups. There's males fighting for dominance. There's massive social interactions going on back here every single day.
So you don't need TV at all. Your soap opera's right
That's
here.
right. I have a telenovela right out my door.
The males really have a very tough life.
Yep.
Or maybe they have it good for a couple of years.
Brutal and short, and a couple of good years for the few percent that are in this position of having a harem. Most of them won't ever have that.
The only way for a male to gain a harem is to dethrone the alpha male, also called the beach master. Capable of diving as deep as a mile, a mature male can be 16 feet long and up to 5,000 pounds.
It's always a matter of just size. If the new guy is smaller, he'll back off. That fight was just a couple hits. The new guy, he backed off. It's really rare when you have a really close matchup, and then you have a big bloody battle between two closely matched males. He was gonna try his luck. That's the only way to find out, is to come up and challenge one of these guys who has a harem of his own.
Life is not much easier for the females, who arrive at a predictable time each year, with the majority giving birth to pups on crowded beaches around the same time. Pups that weigh 60 to 80 pounds. When a pup is born, There's excitement and a lot of agitation. Other females can smell the newborn, and if a nearby female has her own pup, she'll be aggressively protective, even biting and attacking the new baby. She has to stay with her pup at all times to protect it from injury and to avoid getting separated. The pups will nurse for only a month, quadrupling their weight. Then she mates with her massive beachmaster and returns alone to feed in the sea. The pups will remain for a couple of months, surviving on their fat and teaching themselves to swim and to feed. There is now hope that the elephant seals will continue to reign on the beaches they have reclaimed, all within the boundaries of the National Marine Sanctuaries. Each fall and winter, white sharks congregate on the Farallones to prey on young elephant seals as they leave the beach. With a growing number of seals, the white shark population at the Farallones is one of the largest in the world. The team is less likely to see a white shark during spring, but they take precautions.
We're in 60 feet of water. As you guys know, we're in shark country, so I would think you'd want to get in and get on that anchor line and get to the bottom.
The water at the Farallones is green because it's nutrient-rich, sunlit, and full of phytoplankton, or marine plants. The team dives through clouds of tiny mysid shrimp, like swarming bugs. They bear witness to fantastic invertebrates, animals without backbones, growing large and colorful, bathed in these rich waters. Bouquet of anemones are among the network of life that competes for space and resources. Unfortunately, it's what the divers don't see that's a concern.
Historically, the ocean has been considered a sewer. That's the way people felt. And so if you had something you didn't want, you threw it in the ocean.
We have the second biggest nuclear waste dump site in the world, right off San Francisco. There was estimates of about 47,500 barrels of radioactive material that was dumped out there somewhere between 1946 and 1970. And those barrels are 55-gallon drums. They're 16-gauge steel, and they only have a life expectancy of about 10 years.
The majority of the barrels that we found were probably in the 450 to 550 fathom range.
Have you seen a lot of them breached?
Almost all had no containment of materials for inside. The containers were never meant to contain. They were meant to move the material to the bottom.
Well, the concern about any radioactive material is potentially that it could be cancer-producing, and it could bioaccumulate in the food chain and then be found in species of fishes, say, that people would eat out of the seafood markets. And really, if we're to understand what's happening out there, that's something that we ought to be concerned about now, and something we ought to be monitoring on an ongoing basis.
And Tom, why would we dump radioactive material out in the ocean?
Well, that's a good question. Back in the 40s and 50s, when we first started bringing these materials out and dumping them in the ocean, we believed basically out of sight, out of mind, or the solution to pollution is dilution.
So since 1970, we haven't dumped anything in the waters?
No, nothing. No nuclear materials.
No nuclear materials.
Right.
Well, that's a start.
It is a start, and I would hope that they don't, again, look at the ocean for any reason, but especially for things that, one, you don't know what damage they're going to cause. Two, you don't have no way of removing it if it is causing damage. And three, could have significant environmental effects. We don't put that in the ocean. The ocean is the life of the world. Now, I was going to say America, but it's the life of the world. And it's a fluid environment. And there's too much of a danger to put materials in there that are a hazard to the marine environment or to people.
Without major funding for more research or clear evidence of harmful effects, The issue of this nuclear dump site remains, for better or worse, hidden. But back in Monterey, the invisible effects of agricultural and domestic runoff are being investigated.
What we have done is tried to stop the concept that we dump things into the ocean by first working with farmers.
We have really gotten away from the traditional neurotoxic chemistries, and we're really using products nowadays that are very selective. They're very narrow and specific towards the insect or the pathogen that we're going after. We have completely adopted drip irrigation on our 15 ranches, so we're able to place the water right where the plant needs it and not waste water and not create unnecessary overuse or runoff.
Right, because this is very nice, rich soil. You wouldn't want it to end up down there in the slough.
Everything we do in our daily lives impacts the water quality, from driving our cars to picking up after our pets to, not washing our cars on the streets. All of those things can help improve water quality.
Whenever possible after a major storm, volunteers take samples to measure water quality.
So it looks like the transparency here is just about 4 centimeters, and that's quite low for a transparency reading. Typically, anything below 25 centimeters is a red flag for us.
In a surprising turn, samples of urban runoff may hold important clues as to what is affecting an icon of Monterey Bay, the sea otter. Almost hunted to extinction for their pelts 150 years ago, before they were protected and declared threatened. Sea otters have had an unusually slow recovery in Monterey Bay. Urban runoff may be involved. As a brew of chemicals washes from city to sea, it carries a parasite transmitted by household cats, which can cause fatal brain damage in otters. One unlikely contributor may be disposable kitty litter. Lovable, at risk, and a keystone species, sea otters are receiving research attention, as are the deep waters of Monterey Bay, waters that the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute studies.
So the Western Flyer is our expedition ship, and it's designed to go out to sea for up to 3 weeks at a time. We could put 25 people on board, and on board we have a 4,000-meter remotely operated vehicle that we could use to explore the deep reaches of the ocean. The Monterey Bay Canyon is the largest canyon on the west coast of North America, and it is just a gorgeous, stunning feature. We think Monterey Bay is the best studied piece of water anywhere in the world. After 16 years of research here, we estimate we've covered 5% of Monterey Bay.
That's it.
That's it. And that's actually part of the exciting thing as well, because almost every time we go down there, we're looking and finding new things.
In dramatic contrast to Monterey is Cordell Bank, not a canyon, more like a submerged mountain that peaks at 120 feet below the surface in turbulent and dangerous waters. Though only 20 miles from shore, it was impossible to explore until the 1970s, when Bob Schmieder mounted the first research expedition.
When you explore something that has not been described before, you're guaranteed to make discoveries. It always happens, and we did. What we found was this incredibly lush community of organisms just bursting with growth, supporting the food chain all the way from the smallest invertebrates to the large mammals that we see on the surface.
The deep water vitality Schmieder knows is there will be difficult to reach. The wind, currents, and strong swell make Cordell Bank an almost impossible place to dive. And it's critical to set the anchor exactly on the site. The anchor placement seems perfect, but no one's sure if they're on the ridge. Zim will make an exploratory dive before putting the other divers at risk. But the boat pitches, and he hits the rail going in. He gives the OK signal and disappears. But the troubles aren't over, and communications fail.
Diver, this is topside, con check. Try another channel? Or should you just go to one?
Without knowing what's happening, all the team can do is sit and rock and wait.
Brush the bubbles off that float. Yeah, he's there.
Zim didn't descend the 120 feet to the ridge, but he was able to provide the team with underwater conditions and to confirm their position.
I'd say about 20 feet down, that current really drops off.
The rest of the team gets ready for their dive. If they're successful, they'll be the first divers to see Cordell Bank in over 10 years. Below the boat lies the promise of discovery that makes the risk worthwhile. Cordell Bank National Marine Sanctuary represents the phenomenon of a geological feature rising abruptly from the seafloor, bathed in a nutrient-rich current, seeding the ocean with abundance.
The water that flows over Cordell Bank is relatively clean and it's relatively calm. Then there's this upwelling that occurs because of the California current. There's a lot of food coming up from the deep water. This force feeds the population, and so the population just explodes. This very lush invertebrate community supports a lot of fish, but the fish then support the marine mammals and as well the birds. Birds such as the albatross fly clear across the Pacific to Cordell Bank for dinner and then fly all the way back.
After an incredible dive, the team has to fight their way back against strong current. Once at the surface, it takes 40 minutes to get them back in the boat. Finally, on board, the divers can't stop talking about what they've seen.
Woo! Competition for space is what Cordell Banks is all about.
Sponges on Corinactus on sponges, just piling on top of each other. It was just amazing.
The growth rate is so high that it creates these unusual combinations of plants on animals that Fabian was talking about. For instance, when you see algae growing on sponges, growing on hydrocoral, growing on something else, you know that it's a very productive environment, and it's like a soup. So it's as if these things live in soup all the time.
Half a world away, the ocean's treasures aren't so deep or so hidden. In the smallest and most distant sanctuary, at Fungatelli Bay in American Samoa, people have lived intimately with the ocean, but in isolation.
We're all by ourselves here in the midst of a very vast ocean. Everything here is special. The birds, the animals, the plants, even the sea.
This is a pristine coral reef, as much as you can find a pristine coral reef in the world today. There's probably no place else in America with a higher concentration of marine life than right here.
Of all the ecosystems on Earth, coral reefs are among the most resilient and the most diverse. The reef is most like a city under the sea, populated with characters intricately linked to the well-beings of the reef. The corals that create this complex system share one of nature's greatest partnerships. Corals are animals, and tiny plants live within their tissues, giving them their green and brown colors and providing food for the corals in a virtual desert of water. These coralline architects spread outward to attract the most sunshine for their plants, building the largest structures on Earth, as well as creating a metropolis for millions of animals. Evidence of the reef's resilience is everywhere. as new life springs from dead coral, creating underwater monuments. For thousands of years, the coral reef and the Samoan people lived in the Eden of a sustainable, self-sufficient lifestyle.
The Samoans believe that this is the only place on earth. This is the world. So we didn't know before the outsiders came in to our shores that there were other people around the world.
But outsiders did come to Samoa, and when they did, everything changed. The arrival of Western culture in American Samoa brought new ideas, technology, and economic opportunity. But it also brought new problems.
And most seriously, overfishing. It's mainly supposed to be traditional systems only, but it's, modern economic pressures and lack of awareness have caused people to use more destructive methods. And one of the worst things that's happened here is people using bombs, explosives. One of the most recent problems is coral bleaching, caused by sea surface temperatures becoming too warm.
But in general, the coral reef itself is pretty healthy and resilient here. And we've seen it recover from a major crown of thorns outbreak in the late 70s. And then the bleaching events, several hurricanes, you go back, you go down and you go, oh my, what happened here? It's terrible. But then it recovers. It's able to do that, at least for now. The number one priority is resource protection. That's paramount. And most of what we do is education.
Education at Whangatele Bay National Marine Sanctuary includes the Sustainable Reefs program of free teaching materials for educators around the globe, the result of 4 decades of Jean-Michel's effort to protect the world's embattled coral reefs.
Over the years, as Jean-Michel and I and our team have traveled around the world, we're often asked by local communities what we can leave with them that'll help them better educate the local people, particularly kids, about the value of their reefs. What might be the function of corals on a reef? What is a coral good for to the reef ecosystem?
It protects the fish, it provides food and shelter for the fish to live in order for them to grow and reproduce a lot of fishes.
Anybody remember what the job of a sponge is?
Well, the sponges filters the water.
But when you're working with Murphy, questions and answers are only the warm-up. The real class is in the water. Information provided by educators and sanctuary scientists is invaluable. But the Samoan people are sharing the lessons they've learned as well.
Our culture is based on respect. Respect for the land, for the sea. That's why we are sometimes very possessive of what we have.
I think we can learn from the Samoan culture how to be better stewards of our environment.
I'd like the younger generations of Samoa to keep their culture. Although we're now in a modern world, grab hold of your culture, keep it near to your heart, because when everything else fails, we still have our own Samoa. Nothing can affect our islands.
Far to the north and previously explored by the team lies the most remote island group in the world, the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. This remote 1,200-mile archipelago has recently been protected as a national monument, now the largest protected marine area in the world, and will be off limits to all fishing. 1/4 of its species are found nowhere else, and it contains some of the most pristine coral reefs on Earth. But people who have never even seen the ocean affect these islands through what they throw away and what is carried by the currents to these remote shores. These islands bear mute testimony to the fact that for better or for worse, everything is connected.
It's undeniable that we are linked in complex ways to the sea, and that our actions toward it will determine our future. The underwater treasures found in these national marine sanctuaries are a microcosm of the richness of the world's ocean and represent the stewardship that must be shared around the world. What we do makes a difference, and we can no longer ignore the effects of our own behavior. What we can do is continue to learn and take action. And we can celebrate the adventure of our fortunate existence on this incomparable water planet.
One of the things we always attempt to do with our national marine sanctuaries is provide the maximum amount of public access to and enjoyment of the resource. Here we have a wreck that can only be accessed by a handful of technical divers or somebody with a submarine. So in a way, saving all this material from the bottom when we did it was because we felt like we had to prevent losing it entirely. We literally will be able to let millions of people enjoy this.
There are possibly 100,000 shipwrecks in North American waters, each of them a piece of history, each with its own human story. A surprisingly treacherous passage along America's shores lies not at the sea, but in the Great Lakes at Thunder Bay. Known as Shipwreck Alley, the fresh waters of Lake Huron have preserved the most significant collection of shipwrecks in the world, spanning over 2 centuries and making it buried treasure for historians.
How these ships were built, what kind of wood they used, where were they going, where were they coming from? To me, that's part of history. And if I understand my own backyard, then I'll do a better job understanding the rest of the planet.
How many ships are laying at the bottom?
Well, in the whole of the Great Lakes, as many as 10,000. Within the 448 square miles that make up the sanctuary, there are probably 160 and another 50 or 80 or...
Dive into America's coastal waters and discover a fascinating world rich with life and history. A realm of vibrant diversity, from the odd and reclusive to some of the largest creatures on Earth. Join Jean-Michel and the Cousteau team as they explore America's underwater treasures and the national marine sanctuaries created to better understand and protect them. It's Jean-Michel Cousteau, Ocean Adventures.
Jean-Michel Cousteau and his team have explored 6 of the 13 national marine sanctuaries on their mission to reveal and define America's underwater treasures. Sharing the challenge of this enormous task are Jean-Michel's son, Fabien, and daughter, Celine. They now turn to one of America's underwater cultural treasures.
Side scan of the wreck site itself. Now, this is current as of last May. There's the original location of the turret hole. This is a section of the armor belt that was swung out.
Which is here now.
Right.
Yes.
So that'd be out about here.
Let's talk about currents.
The current is normally
This
cutting
way.
across just about at that angle. Now, having said that, though, we have had current meters out here that show that the current goes all the way around the compass.
Okay.
This is their deepest national marine sanctuary dive, requiring weeks of training to master the technology that allows them to stay deeper longer at 8 atmospheres of pressure.
Understand, you are looking for the wreck.
They breathe a mixture of helium and oxygen, less narcotic at depth than nitrogen. But they must descend slowly to prevent dangerous oxygen buildup in the rebreathers.
We see the wreck. Okay.
The monitor's shape becomes apparent, claimed completely by the sea. It first served in war. Now it serves the ocean as a platform for life. This deep dive is one back in time to a very real piece of history. The team locates a hole where the anchor chain was stored, then swims along the monitor's armored belt that forms the famous outline of the ironclad shipwreck. The sanctuary staff have asked the team to collect samples of wood and iron, part of ongoing studies to provide a better understanding of the saltwater deterioration of the components that were used to construct the monitor and to aid in its restoration. The sample will reach the surface long before the divers, who will spend over 2 hours on the anchor line decompressing. For Matt and Blair, history has become personal. To preserve the turret, each of the 8 1-inch thick layers must be removed from the outer hull and treated, a process that may take 10 years. It will then go on display at the Mariners Museum in Newport News, Virginia, where it will join the collection of other artifacts recovered from the monitor and the first national marine sanctuary, a Civil War battleship lost off the coast of North Carolina, the USS Monitor. Over 240 feet below the surface, it will be a technical and potentially dangerous dive. 1862. The USS Monitor was the Union Army's answer to the Confederate ironclad ship, the Virginia. It had the world's first successful revolving turret, allowing the crew to aim and fire the guns rapidly in any direction, and was the first ship to house crew entirely below the waterline. On New Year's Eve, 1862, after less than a year of service, the Monitor sank in a severe storm. 16 crewmen died.
For the archaeological community, the primary goal that you have when you have a site like this is to preserve it in place. We found out that we were really losing the wreck quickly, and if we didn't try to save some of the most important pieces of the Monitor, particularly the turret, that the whole thing was going to collapse.
If their dive is successful, Matt, Blair, and Director of Photography Chuck Davis will join the select few to lay eyes on this historic site.
what are we going to do? Where do we put them?
And what we want to do is be able to make sure when you hit the wreck site that you're familiar with which way to go when you know, so you're not wasting time on the bottom. This is the north side, or the high side of the wreck as we call it. Like I say, the turret's gone. In fact, here's a current